Jake, a cowboy who spent most of his days riding across the open plains, was on his usual journey, just letting his horse follow the trail. It was a hot, dry day, and the sun beat down from the sky like an unforgiving hand. The dust seemed to rise up from the earth itself, swirling in the hot air. He didn't mind it much. It was just another day of riding, his thoughts lost in the rhythm of his horse's steps. As he made his way along the old dirt road, he saw something up ahead that caught his eye. A small old wagon, its wheel broken. A frail elderly woman stood next to it, her weathered face lined with years of hard living. She looked like someone who had seen too much of life and was now facing another challenge she couldn't handle alone. She looked out of place in the vast wilderness, stranded with no one around to help. The woman waved, her arm shaking slightly, but it was enough to catch Jake's attention. He slowed his horse and pulled up beside her, wondering if she needed help. "Ma'am," he called out, tipping his hat politely, "looks like you're in a bit of a bind. Can I help you with something?" She looked up at him, her tired eyes filled with gratitude. "I've been stuck here for hours," she said, her voice soft but carrying a quiet strength. "The wheel on my wagon broke and I don't have the strength to fix it. I've tried, but I just can't do it alone." Jake took a moment to look at the old wagon. It was a rickety thing covered in dust, clearly having seen better days. The wheel, broken in a way that would be difficult to repair without the right tools, had left her stranded out in the middle of nowhere. He didn't hesitate for long. He was a man who couldn't walk away from someone in need, especially not someone like this old woman. "Don't worry, ma'am. I'll take care of it," Jake said, his voice calm and reassuring. He dismounted from his horse and walked over to inspect the damage. The wheel was badly worn, the axle seemed to have come loose, and there was no way the woman could have fixed it herself. But Jake was a cowboy, and working with his hands was something he knew well. He often found himself helping others along his travels, and he never minded doing so. With a few tools he kept in his saddlebag, Jake began the task of repairing the wagon. His hands worked quickly and efficiently, knowing that every minute wasted could mean the old woman being stranded even longer. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the road, but Jake didn't mind. He was used to working in tough conditions, and the woman was grateful for his help. "Thank you," she said again as Jake tightened the last bolt. Her eyes sparkled a little brighter and she smiled, though her smile was weary. "I didn't think anyone would come along this way." Jake gave a modest shrug. "It's nothing. Just doing what anyone would do." But even as he said it, he knew it was more than just a simple repair. There was something about this woman, her quiet dignity, the way she stood there in the middle of the barren land with no complaints, that made him feel a deep sense of respect. He had seen many people in his life, but there was something about her that felt different. Once the wheel was fixed, Jake stood back and wiped his hands on his jeans. "There you go. It should hold up fine now. You'll be able to get where you need to go." The woman looked at him with a mixture of relief and gratitude. "You don't know how much this means to me. I don't have much, but I'll be sure to repay you somehow." Jake shook his head. "No need for repayment. I'm just glad I could help. But if you don't mind me asking, where are you headed? You don't seem like you're from around here." She hesitated for a moment before answering. "I'm trying to get to my daughter's place. It's a long way from here, and I've been on the road for days now, but I'm afraid I won't make it much further today." Jake looked around. The road stretched out in both directions, empty and endless. The sun was starting to set, and the temperature was beginning to drop, but it was still a long way before they'd reach the nearest town. The old woman clearly couldn't travel much farther on her own, especially with how weak and tired she seemed. "I can't just leave you here," Jake said. "I'll take you to your daughter's place. It's the least I can do after helping you with the wagon. I'm headed that way myself, so I'll ride along with you." The old woman's face softened with relief, and she nodded gratefully. "I don't want to put you out, but I'd be much obliged for the company. It's been a lonely road." Jake helped her back into the wagon, making sure she was settled before mounting his horse again. He didn't mind the detour. Helping someone in need was just the right thing to do, and he figured it would only add a few hours to his journey. Besides, the thought of leaving her alone out there was something he couldn't bear. As they began to move down the road, the old woman started to tell Jake more about her life. She spoke of her daughter, who lived in a small town, and the grandchildren she rarely saw. She told him stories of her youth, her eyes lighting up when she spoke of her family, and it made Jake realize just how much she missed them. She had spent most of her life caring for others, raising children and tending to the needs of her family. Now, in her later years, she was finding the road long and hard, and the thought of being alone in the wilderness had become overwhelming. Jake listened quietly, occasionally nodding in agreement or offering a simple word of comfort. He had heard many stories on his travels, but there was something about this woman's voice so full of wisdom and experience that made him listen more intently. As the sky grew darker, Jake noticed that the old woman was beginning to tire. Her head drooped slightly, and he could tell she was struggling to keep her eyes open. He urged his horse forward, hoping they could reach her daughter's home before the night got any later. After some time, they reached the outskirts of a small town, and the old woman pointed toward a house up ahead. "That's my daughter's place," she said, her voice filled with relief. Jake nodded and guided his horse toward the house, feeling a sense of accomplishment. They had made it. As they approached, Jake could see figures standing on the porch of the house, watching them with curious eyes. He slowed his horse, ready to help the old woman get inside, but little did he know, the journey was about to take an unexpected turn. As Jake guided his horse toward the house, he could feel the tension building. The night had settled in and the air had cooled, but the atmosphere around the house felt heavy. 5 women stood on the porch, their eyes focused on the approaching wagon. They were young, but each of them carried a weight of responsibility in their posture, their protective stances clear. These were the old woman's granddaughters, and it was obvious from the looks on their faces that they weren't used to strangers, especially not men, bringing their grandmother home. The old woman gave a soft sigh of relief as they reached the front yard, her hand resting gently on the edge of the wagon. "There we are," she said quietly, almost to herself, but loud enough for Jake to hear. "My daughter's home." Jake pulled his horse to a stop and dismounted, stretching his legs from the long ride. He turned to help the old woman from the wagon, but before he could even reach her, the granddaughters were already moving, each of them stepping down from the porch with their eyes locked on him. The oldest, a tall woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense air about her, moved toward them first. "Who is this?" she demanded, crossing her arms tightly. Her voice was firm, a little demanding, as if she had already decided she didn't like what she saw. Jake didn't back down. He stood tall, tipping his hat respectfully to the group of women, but his calm demeanor didn't seem to ease the tension. "I'm Jake," he said simply. "I found your grandmother on the road. Her wagon broke down and I helped fix it. I was just giving her a ride home." The woman's eyes narrowed and she stepped forward, clearly unimpressed. "We don't need help from strangers," she said, her voice cold but not unkind. "We take care of our grandmother just fine." Jake's eyes flicked from one granddaughter to the next, noting the way they all stood in a line, guarding their space. They were protective, and Jake understood why. The old woman was their family, and they wanted to make sure she was safe. He could tell these women didn't trust easily. But he wasn't the kind of man to back down from doing what he thought was right. "I'm sorry if I've caused any trouble," Jake said, trying to ease the situation. "I didn't mean to overstep. Your grandmother was stranded, and I just wanted to make sure she was safe." The woman who had spoken first didn't soften her stance. "That's kind of you, but we don't need anyone else looking out for her. We're fine here." Jake didn't want to argue with them. He could see they were just doing their best to look out for their grandmother. But there was something in the way they were all gathered, their eyes full of suspicion and concern. He couldn't just walk away without at least making sure the old woman was settled. "I understand," he said calmly, trying to offer them some peace. "But I just wanted to be sure she made it home safely. That's all." The tension in the air was thick, and the youngest granddaughter, a girl who seemed a little unsure of the whole situation, fidgeted nervously behind the others. Jake could see the worry on her face, like she was torn between wanting to help and being afraid of what a stranger might want. "We appreciate you helping Grandma, but I think you should leave now," the oldest granddaughter said, her voice firm and final. "We can take it from here." Jake nodded, not wanting to make things more complicated than they already were. "All right, ma'am. I'll be on my way." He turned to his horse, ready to leave, but then something unexpected happened. The old woman, who had been quietly watching the exchange, called out to him. "Wait." Jake stopped and looked back at her. Her voice was soft, but there was something in it that made him pause. She was standing in the doorway of the house now, her frail form silhouetted by the dim light coming from inside. "Please," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Don't go yet. Jake took a step back toward her, his expression softening. Ma'am, you don't have to. No, she interrupted gently, shaking her head. I don't want you to leave. You helped me, and I don't want you to leave without knowing I appreciate it. Please stay for a while. The granddaughters, all 5 of them, exchanged uncertain looks, their faces a mix of surprise and hesitation. It was clear they hadn't expected their grandmother to speak up like this, and for a moment there was a silence heavy with unspoken words. Finally, the oldest granddaughter stepped forward, her expression still cautious but softer now. She looked at Jake, then back at her grandmother. Grandma, we're not sure about this, she said, her voice quiet but filled with concern. You don't know this man. What if he helped me? The old woman interrupted, her voice stronger than before. He didn't have to, but he did. And I'm not going to send him away. The tension in the air shifted. The granddaughters, though still wary, began to relax a little, though they didn't look entirely happy about the situation. The oldest granddaughter sighed, stepping back with a reluctant nod. All right, Grandma, she said, her tone softening, but only for a little while. You need to be careful. Jake's heart felt lighter. He wasn't expecting a warm welcome, but just the fact that the old woman had stood up for him despite her family's concerns meant something. He nodded at the granddaughters and gave them a respectful smile. I'll only stay for a short while, he said. I don't want to intrude. As Jake entered the small house, the warmth of the fire inside welcomed him, and the smell of something cooking filled the air. The old woman motioned for him to sit at the small wooden table, where a few chairs had been pulled together. The granddaughters watched him carefully, each of them sitting on the opposite side of the room, as if waiting for him to do something wrong. The old woman, whose name was Mary, smiled gently as she sat down across from him. Thank you, Jake, she said softly, her voice now filled with a quiet sense of relief. I can't express how grateful I am. Jake smiled back, feeling a warmth in his chest. It was nothing. I'm just glad you're home safe. Mary's eyes shimmered a little as she looked at him, her gaze soft and full of gratitude. I've been through so much in my life, and I didn't think I'd meet someone like you today. You've done more for me than anyone could have asked for. Jake shifted uncomfortably but didn't say anything. He didn't want to make it seem like he was expecting praise. He was just glad he could help. But as he looked around the room at Mary's granddaughters, still watching him with cautious eyes, he knew the night was far from over. There were still many unspoken words between him and the family, and it was clear that getting their trust wouldn't be easy.